So I want to get started and welcome Catherine Wutchiett and Carol Veen from Legal Aid at Work. And Catherine leads the implementation of their medical law partnership with WIC and home visiting programs in Contra Costa County. She provides legal advice and representation, technical support, and community education regarding workplace rights for those struggling with family and medical crises. Catherine has trained hundreds of healthcare and service providers and has provided legal representation to dozens of low-wage, frequently immigrant workers through state investigations, mediations, and litigations. Carol Veen is a staff attorney and the director of the Wage Protection Program. She provides information, advice, and representation to workers on their employment rights with a focus on wage and hour and unemployment insurance costs. Carol also trains and supervises legal advocates to represent clients at administrative wage claims hearings and unemployment insurance appeals that engages in community education. We couldn't have two better, more qualified presenters here today. We're so grateful to you, Catherine and Carol, and we welcome and take it away, both of you. Thank you again so much, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Beth, and thanks, Lee, for setting all of this up. We're really happy to be speaking with you and to be able to share some more information about workers' rights and unemployment in the face of COVID. Because I'm sure, as you've all seen, we've been running into all these circumstances that we haven't seen before, or circumstances where suddenly everybody's struggling with the same issues, everybody has sick family, and everybody's in a situation where they can't work. And at the same time, every week we're getting an update saying that the law has changed in a new way. So we want to kind of walk through with you what some of these rights are, what these protections are, to help you understand so that you can talk to others about it as well. And so everything we talk about here today, it's up to date as of today, which is April 28th. I'm saying this because we're recording it, and things will inevitably continue to change, but we want to make sure that everybody has the information that they need so they feel like they can make the best decisions for themselves and help others to figure out what works best for them and their family. So just as some background about Legal Aid at Work, we're a nonprofit law center centered in San Francisco, but we provide services all across the state. And mostly what we do kind of breaks down into a couple of categories. So we have a number of helplines where we provide people with direct services. On top of that, we engage in public education, training people, workers, healthcare providers, so that everyone can access these really important rights on their own without necessarily having to seek out an attorney. On top of that, we represent people when things do go wrong at work or where they're having struggles with dealing with a state administrative agency and working out their rights. So that could be helping somebody with an unemployment appeal or filing a case for them or helping them make a complaint with the Department of Fair Employment and Housing. It really just depends on what works best for that person. And then finally, we also engage in policy advocacy. So I think one of the things that unfortunately you'll see as we're going through this is that a lot of these laws aren't exactly what you'd want them to be. There are still gaps. There are still people who should have the right to take time off and know that their job is safe, should be able to get paid when they can't work, but they can't. So we continue to push to make that better, and hopefully the updates that will come after this will be even stronger rights. So with that, just to kind of go over what we're going to be focusing on today, it's kind of three main categories. So how people can take time off from work, how people can get paid while they're taking that time off, and then also unemployment insurance for when they're not able to work and their work is not providing them with pay. And so I know a lot of people are currently out of work and maybe not looking for how to take leaves, but I want to flag that I think these issues, paid sick days, taking time off from work, even if it's not necessarily, at the center of what folks are worried about right now, as businesses start to reopen and as employers start to ask people to come back to work, but they don't necessarily feel that it's safe for them or for their family and they're not ready to go back, these laws are going to be especially important to keep in mind so that workers don't end up in a situation of having to decide, okay, you know, I don't feel safe going back to work, but my employer's saying I can go back. What do I do? First of all, I want to thank all of you for filling out the pre-training survey that we sent out, just to kind of get a sense of where all of you are entering this and what information you're looking for. The first question was how confident you feel in your ability to advise families about workplace rights in this public health crisis. And it looks like a couple of you are very confident, but you know, a lot of the rest of you are looking for more information and could learn things. About 1/5 are looking for information for yourselves, and that's absolutely great as well. And then the second question was, what percentage of you, of the families that you work with, need assistance with this type of information or unemployment? And it looks like a majority of you said that it is a significant number of people that you're working with. It looks like about half of you said over half of the people that you work with are looking for this information. So I'm glad to hear that. I hope this will be helpful, and feel free to ask any questions along the way in chat. So since we are doing this via Zoom and we have all these wonderful functions, I'd like to start off by kind of a break the ice. So if all of you would be willing to share just a few words about how you're feeling today, generally going into this, that would be great. Carol, how are you feeling? Carol disappeared, but
I am happy to be here with all of you and feeling that I'm healthy, and that makes me happy.
That's great. I guess I'm feeling optimistic. Things are pretty dark, but everybody's coming together and learning, and I'm here this morning with all of you, healthy, so things are pretty good. I'm looking at some of your responses, and thanks so much for sharing with us. We've got a mix: optimistic, anxious, stressed, overwhelmed, stressed, peachy and blessed. I like it. Open, concerned, hopeful, meh. I think all of us have probably felt most of these things within the last couple of days.
Or in the last hour.
Yeah, the last hour. It's a tough that. Yeah. Concerned of constant changes. That's exactly it. Everything is constantly changing. So thank all of you for sharing with us, and hopefully this will be helpful to you, and feel free to add questions in the chat throughout. Some of them we might answer in time, others we might leave because a future slide is going to address that question. And then we're also going to have some time for question and answer at the end. So if you type something in and you don't get an immediate answer, we're still listening, we're still going to get to it. It just might depend when that is. So with that, we'll get started. So I'm going to start by talking about leaves from work and getting paid while taking leave. And then after that, Carol is going to jump in and cover more specifics about unemployment. So one of the new laws that you might have heard about is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And so it started April 1st. It'll go through the end of the year. And what it does is it provides people who are currently working or currently have hours available to work with paid sick days as well as paid leave. It doesn't apply to all employers. It only applies to employers with fewer than 500 employees. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. And it provides 2 weeks of paid sick days and up to 12 weeks of paid school closure leave. So starting with the paid sick days. So it's 2 weeks of job protected leave, and it's either with full pay or partial pay. So there are 5 circumstances under which somebody can access these paid sick days. So it's not just like if you are sick, there's a number of other ways that you can qualify for them. So the first is if the worker is subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order related to COVID-19. So that includes all of the shelter-in-place orders that people are subject to right now. So if somebody has an employer that's asking them to come in and wants to schedule them for hours, but that person specifically is the subject of one of those shelter-in-place orders, they could use this paid sick time to get paid and to stay home. The second way somebody can use this time is if they have been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine due to concerns related to COVID-19. So that means a person doesn't necessarily have to have COVID-19, but like if somebody has been exposed recently and their healthcare provider thinks that they should remain in quarantine so that they don't risk other people, even if they don't have symptoms themselves and they're scheduled to work, they have the right to take 2 weeks and to receive pay from their employer during this time. The third circumstance is if that employee is experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 and seeking a medical diagnosis. So it's important to be clear that somebody does not actually need to have a COVID diagnosis in order to access this time. It's just if they're experiencing symptoms and seeking medical care. So the seeking is important because I know, there's all this guidance saying that people shouldn't go to healthcare provider settings unless they need to, trying to keep people social distancing. That's why this includes seeking medical care. So if somebody is perhaps trying to schedule a virtual appointment or in contact with a healthcare provider but has not been able to be tested, because tests are few and far between as well, that can still be enough to allow them to take these 2 weeks, have their job be safe, and receive pay from their employer. And then so the other 2 reasons that somebody can take this time is if they are taking care of a sick family member who has been diagnosed with COVID or is subject to a quarantine or isolation order or has been advised to self-quarantine. And then also if the worker is caring for a child whose school or daycare provider is closed or unavailable due to COVID-19. And on top of that, there's room for the Secretary of Health and Human Services to create other circumstances under which somebody can use this time, but they haven't filled any of those out yet. And so I see one question that came in, and the question is, what about larger employers? Unfortunately, this law does not apply to employers with over 500 employees. It's a huge gap, and I think there are definitely efforts to fix that in the next series of bills that'll be passed to protect workers. But right now, if somebody works for an employer with over 500 employees, this protection doesn't apply. A few slides later, we'll talk about some of the kind of existing laws that protect people when they're sick or they need to care for somebody that we had in California, not specifically targeted to COVID-19, but still helpful in the circumstance. And those will apply to larger employers. Another question that I see right now that I want to address is, so how does somebody actually get this benefit? So this is money that the employer needs to pay to the employee. So you don't have to go to an agency, you just have to go to your specific employer. And this is for people who are employees, not independent contract workers, although a lot of people are misclassified, so they might actually be employees. And Carol's going to talk more about this later on. So I mentioned that that you get paid by an employer. And the pay rate varies. So if the reason you are taking this time is because of a reason related to your specific health, so you are sick, you've been told to quarantine, or you are subject to an isolation order, you can get 100% of your pay, up to $511 per day. But if you were taking this time to care for a sick family member or other individual living in your household, or because you're caring for a child whose school or daycare has closed or their normal source of care is not available, then it's 2/3 of your pay, up to a total of $200 per day. And I see another question that came up, which was, okay, what if you're working from home? So all of these rights also apply if you're working from home, but they do connect to whether or not you are actually able to work. So if let's say you were working in a hair salon, and because of one of the local quarantine orders, you are not able to go to that hair salon to work. Maybe the hair salon was in a different county and it is open, so some people are working, but you cannot get to it because of a quarantine order. You would be able to get that paid sick time and get paid. But if you're working from home and you're subject to a quarantine order, the quarantine order itself isn't going to prevent you from being able to do your work. But in contrast, if you have children that would be in school or daycare, and now you are the one who's responsible for caring for them, even though you're working from home, you have to care for your children, and that makes it so that you can't work, then you would still be able to get that pay. So working from home, it's the same, but it's just a question of, is whatever the circumstance that you're facing something that stops you from being able to perform your work? And so it's paid directly by the employer, but employers can get 100% of what they pay refunded. I think they get to deduct it from payroll taxes that they would pay. And afterwards, we can send out other resources as well. I know one of my colleagues did a great training with First Five in a different location for small providers of childcare, and went over some of the small business rights. So I do want to flag that there are some exemptions to these laws, and one is that it does exempt healthcare providers and emergency responders. And unfortunately, the Department of Labor has defined these really broadly. So when it says healthcare providers, what they've said is they mean basically anybody who's working in a medical setting. So anybody who's working in a hospital or medical office. There are advocates who are encouraging the DOL to reconsider, because that covers a lot of people. And also, I don't think we want our healthcare providers going to work sick. But unfortunately, right now they are excluded. There's also one exemption but it's only for when somebody needs to take time off because of a school care closure. And that's if the business has fewer than 50 employees and they can show that that individual taking leave would jeopardize the business. So it's not just would it be hard for the business, but it would jeopardize the very function of the business, its viability. Then the employer can claim an exemption and not provide that person with paid leave or paid time off. And I see a lot of good questions coming in. I'm going to keep rolling through, but we will be sure to get back to these if they're not answered as we go. So I see one question is, what if you become ill with another acute condition? So these laws are specific to coronavirus, but we will be talking about other protections that people have in California outside of this one. So then the other half of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act is that it provides 12 weeks of job protected paid leave if you need to take care of a child whose school or daycare provider or any normal source of care is closed or unavailable because of COVID-19. So it's these 12 weeks, they're not available for your own illness. They're not available to take care of sick family members. They're only available for childcare. So this is another gap that hopefully will be fixed, because if you're sick, you certainly need time off too, as well as if your family members are. But right now it's only for school closure. So the first 2 weeks are unpaid, but the way that this works out in practice generally is you would take those 2 weeks of the paid sick time followed by the other 10 weeks of this time. So you could be paid for the whole 12 weeks just by combining the paid sick with the paid leave. And so this is also paid at the rate of 2/3 up to $200 per day. And the only threshold requirement for the employee, again, the employer has to have fewer than 500 employees, is that the employee must have worked for their employer for 30 days. So this has the exact same exemptions. So healthcare providers, emergency responders, they're not covered. And if somebody works for a business with fewer than 50 employees and they can show that it would jeopardize the business, then the employer can still claim the exemption. The only other detail is that if the employer has fewer than 25 employees, the employer is able to, instead of returning somebody to their same job, make best efforts to return somebody. And so again, I just want to flag about these. Like, I know a lot of people are out of work right now, but it's just really key to keep these in mind once people start being sent back to work, because, you know, schools might remain closed, but certain businesses might be asking people to come back. So it's not just about, so if you're talking to somebody and they're currently laid off, or you're currently laid off, I want to make sure that you still pay attention to this, because as things slowly start to reopen, you know, as we've seen from the news, it's not just going to be a sudden flip of the switch and everything's open and everybody can go back to work. There are going to be tricky questions about, you know, does it feel safe to go back to work? You know, what happens with the kids when you go back to work if daycare has decided to remain closed at this time? Okay, so on top of these protections that are the new federal ones designed to address the COVID crisis, I want to make sure that everybody knows that employees already have paid sick days in California. So every worker has the right to accrue and use up to 3 days per year. And they're available once somebody's been working for their employer for 90 days. And so these can be used for illness, for diagnosis, preventative care, for taking care of sick family members as well. And so these are in addition to those federal days that we were just talking about. So if you work for an employer with fewer than 500 employees and you've been employed for 90 days, you will have these 10 new days, these 2 new weeks of federal paid sick time. And then you'll also have these 3 days from California paid sick days. And on top of that, depending on the city that somebody is working in, it's based on the city where they work, not the city where they live. People likely have additional paid sick days, like if they're working in Berkeley or Emeryville or San Francisco. And then some cities are currently working on expanding and passing more significant paid sick days to address this crisis. And I think Oakland has something underway, though I don't know where it stands at the moment. So as a part of these laws, employers are not allowed to retaliate against employees for taking advantage of these rights. So on top of those paid sick days laws, I do want to flag a few other ones that are important, because they can provide other ways that people can take time off and know that their job is safe. So one important one is the California Family Rights Act. And so what that does is it allows someone to take 12 weeks of leave while their job is protected if they have a serious health condition or if a family member has a serious health condition. And this is the same law that people can use when they need to bond with a new baby as well. So this is an important protection because it's 12 whole weeks. It allows for the continuation of health benefits but it is extremely limited in who can access it. So somebody needs to have been working for their employer for an entire year. They need to have worked at least an average of 25 hours per week, or 1,250 in that year. And their employer needs to have at least 50 employees working within 75 miles. But unlike the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the FFCRA, there is no 500 employee cap. So for somebody who's working at a very large employer, this would be the law that would allow them to take extended time off and to know that their job is safe. On top of that, there's another protection that people should consider seeking out called the Fair Employment and Housing Act. And it's like the Americans with Disabilities Act for the state. So this applies to any employer that has at least 5 employees. So if somebody has an employer that is too small, so they're not covered by the California Family Rights Act, this is something that they can look to. And what it does is it requires employers to let employees who have disabilities take leave from work as a reasonable accommodation, unless it would be an undue burden on the employer. So there's no tenure requirement for the employee. The employer size is only 5 employees. So it applies to anybody who works at an employer with at least 5 employees. But then the downside is that it's not like you absolutely get 12 weeks. It's you get as much time as you need, unless it's too hard for us to give you that time. So if you run into somebody who needs that leave, I'd recommend having them call us. They'll need to talk to their healthcare provider to get a certification, because it's not just a one-size-fits-all solution. And then another protection I do want to make sure we talk about is the Family School Partnership Act. And so what that does is it allows someone to take up to 40 hours of leave when their school or daycare is closed because of an emergency. It can also generally throughout the year be used for childcare activities or to seek out a new childcare center or school. The time doesn't have to be paid, but it does protect that person's job. So it's up to 40 hours for a school emergency. So it's not long enough, and I think there might be some bills moving this year to make it longer. Senator Jackson has one. We'll see what happens with it at the state level. But right now it's 40 hours, so it's 1 week. If your child goes to daycare, the daycare closes, you can take that time and know that your job will be protected. And this does not have that 500 employee ceiling either. Sorry, I'm figuring out the direction of the slide. Okay, things like this. Yeah. So just to make sure that we have some more details on how somebody qualifies for the California Family Rights Act, here it is spelled out. So like we said, it's 12 weeks. Somebody does have to have a large employer, and they have to have been working for a year and at least 25 hours per week in that year. And for the Fair Employment and Housing Act, like we were talking about, it's 5 or more employees, and it provides unpaid leave as a reasonable accommodation. And it also provides other accommodations. So it's not one where you just have to say, okay, I need leave from work. You can also request any other change that somebody needs because of their disability. So it could be in the circumstance that somebody needs to work remotely if they have an underlying health condition, and it would be dangerous for them to go into work. So this law allows them to request that change. And then finally, here's the Family School Partnership Act. So it's important to remember that it only applies to employers with at least 25 employees, but it does allow somebody to take this time off for a childcare emergency or to engage in childcare activities. So we're lucky in California that we have this law. Almost nobody knows about it, so I'm glad all of you do now. It will be helpful in this crisis and helpful afterwards as well. But it really shows the gap that we have where, it's 40 hours, that's great. But when a school's closing for a health crisis, it's not going to just be for 1 week. So I do want to make sure that we talk about how you can actually get paid when you can't work because of your health or because of a family member's health. So there's a program called State Disability Insurance, and this applies to anybody who's an employee who cannot work because of their health. So every paycheck, a little bit of your money gets put into the EDD's State Disability Insurance Fund. And then if there's a time you cannot work, the state will pay you 60 or 70% of what you would normally be making if you were working. So there's a 1 week waiting period normally, but if the reason somebody's ill and cannot work is COVID-19, that will be waived. But one important thing to be aware of for this is that under this law, citizenship and immigration status are irrelevant. So you do not need to be a citizen to get state disability insurance. The application does request a social security number. So anyone can feel free to reach out to us to ask for more information about what that means and how to handle it. The agency does use a social security number so that they can track what money somebody has been paying into the system. But the EDD has told us that it does not matter to them if that social security number belongs to somebody or not. It's just a way to track what money somebody is paying into the system. So it's important to keep this protection in mind, because Carol will go into it more later on, but immigration status is more of a barrier for unemployment insurance. So if somebody cannot work because of their health, state disability insurance will be available. And I know I'm falling behind on the questions. You all have so many wonderful questions, and I'll get to many of them later. This does cover mental health. Mental health is covered the same way that physical health conditions are. So if somebody is taking leave to take care of somebody else's health, if they have a sick family member, they can get paid family leave from the state, which is that same rate of pay for 6 weeks, and it'll be 8 weeks in July. So just to go over some tips for applying for these important benefits, like I said, documentation status does not matter, but right now they are requiring medical certifications. We're working with the EDD to see if they'll find a way to relax that in some way, because like we were talking about, it's not easy for people to seek healthcare at the moment. But they will require medical certification for either paid family leave or state disability insurance, but a virtual examination is okay. If somebody applies online, it will require their social security number and a California driver's license. For the paper application, there is a space on the state disability insurance form to put in other social security number. So somebody can list a social security number that they're working under without promising that it is their social security number. For the PFL application, it does not have an other social security number blank, but a worker can send in a W-2 or a note saying this is the number that I worked under. If you apply without a social security number, it is likely that it will initially be rejected, but because they've said that immigration status does not matter, it's even on their website in bold now. If you follow up, you can get through to them. So if you're working with somebody who's trying to get through that process and is confused or worried, they should feel free to reach out to us, and we'll provide our phone number at the end. You can apply retroactive up to 42 days. Longer if there's a good reason, and saying I did not know about state disability insurance or paid family leave is generally a pretty good reason. But it's good to include any extenuating circumstances, any reasons that it was hard for you or for that worker to apply. And for workers who are misclassified, they can get paid family leave or state disability insurance. And so what I mean by misclassified is that they are an employee, even if their employer says that they're an independent contractor. So if somebody is in that situation, it's a good time to call Carol or me, or do some research to see, do they really think that they are an employee, or, is the person who's paying them correct that they are an independent contractor, because so many of these rights depend on that status. So just to go over what happens when somebody files. So the first step is filing a claim with the EDD. And again, so this is just for state disability insurance and paid family leave. The FFCRA and paid sick days that we were talking about before, all of that is paid by the employer. It's not paid by the state. Once somebody applies, they'll get a notice of computation, which will list the potential weekly benefit amount that they would get based on their earnings. Then if they're eligible, the EDD will send an electronic benefit payment notification. It gives the person receiving that the choice to be paid by a debit card or by a check in the mail. They are faster with a debit card. So if the debit card works, it's good to tell them that it can, because that way someone will get paid much more quickly. And if the person is deemed not eligible, the EDD will send a notice of determination saying that, and an appeal form where someone can appeal within 30 days. Okay, I'm sorry about that. The order of the slides got mixed up somehow, but so this has more information about the paid family leave program. So I do want to flag for the state disability insurance and paid family leave that we're talking about. Even if you have been laid off from your job or you're not currently employed, you might still be able to get them. What the state is looking for is, would you be working or looking for work? So, a part of the labor market, except for the fact that you cannot be because you are taking care of sick family, or you are because of your own serious health condition that prevents you from doing your job. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Carol, who's going to talk more about unemployment insurance. And then at the end, we can go through more questions together. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you to all of you. I've never seen so many amazing questions. You have all kept me very busy while Katie has been talking, writing them down, and hopefully we will be able to get to all of them in the question and answer session. So I'm going to transition to unemployment insurance for those who are either underemployed or completely not working right now. And unfortunately, in the state of California, we're looking at around 3 million people who have applied for unemployment insurance in the last, I would say, 4 to 6 weeks. It is an unprecedented number of applications, both in terms of the volume and the short time frame. And so the system is impacted in a way that it has never been impacted before. And so I think the first thing I'll say about unemployment insurance is that those who are seeking it need to be very patient and also persistent. So with that, I will turn to some of the substance of unemployment insurance. Unemployment insurance is temporary partial wage replacement for people who are unemployed through no fault of their own. In terms of the duration, under normal circumstances, one can receive unemployment insurance for up to 26 weeks in California. We'll talk about the new federal provisions, which are extending it currently for an additional 13 weeks, which will total up to 39 weeks here in California during a claim year. That means that a claim is valid for a whole calendar year, and that you can collect any 26 weeks or 39 weeks during that claim year. It can be intermittent and doesn't have to be all at once. And that might be helpful for people who may go back to work and then return to being unemployed or underemployed and then go back to work, that sort of situation. Benefits. So the benefit amount is, I think, shockingly low in California. It's $40 to $450 a week, and that is based on you having what earnings you have in your base period. Your base period is something that I'll discuss a little bit more later on, but the base period is usually for people who are applying this month or this quarter, the second quarter of 2020, the base period is the calendar year of 2019. And to qualify for unemployment insurance, you had to have earned at least $1,300 during that year. Of course, if you only earned $1,300, you'd be receiving probably $40 a week, which no one can live on in California. So luckily, the federal government has come in and they are supplementing our state benefits with an additional $600 a week. That's a huge boost, and a lot of workers are going to be now receiving between $640 and $1,050 a week through unemployment insurance. It's important to note that if you are working even some hours, part-time wages are to be reported and they will be offset against your benefits. Also important to realize that if you offset all of your California benefits, you'll be ineligible to receive the additional $600 from the federal government. You need to at least receive $1 in California unemployment insurance benefits to receive the $600. So there's a little bit of a sweet spot in there where you could actually, still work a little and still receive some unemployment insurance benefits. But it's something to be mindful and careful with. In terms of no-fault separation, and right now, because of the processing demands on the agency, they are streamlining everything. Everything is just going through, and they're going to go back later and verify what the separations were, but they're not doing that at this time. Traditionally, they would look at the separation, they would call the worker, they would call the employer, they would do an investigation of sorts to really determine how the separation occurred. That is not occurring right now. It's possible that they're going to go back and do that later. It's not clear. I don't know that they'll have the capacity to ever do it, but you should just be aware that it could result in a future overpayment if they are approving everybody now and then going back later to check. So just something to be aware of. A clear, typical, classic no-fault separation is a layoff or a lack of work or having just reduced hours because of slow business. This is probably the large majority of people who are applying for unemployment insurance right now. In terms of the other kinds of separations, you can still collect unemployment insurance if you've been terminated, so as long as it wasn't for misconduct. And misconduct is actually a pretty high standard in the unemployment insurance code. It has to be pretty egregious, it has to be willful, it has to cause material harm to the employer. So it's a pretty high standard. I think for people who are being terminated because they're not going to work right now, unless you have a history of absenteeism, it's likely not to rise to the level of misconduct because it's not intentional. It's not trying to hurt the employer. There's not a pattern of it. Those are the things that usually rise to the level of misconduct. Good cause quit. You are eligible for unemployment insurance if you quit your job, so long as you have good cause. A lot of workers understand that if they quit, they're going to be out of luck, and that's not true. So I want to focus on the two kind of fact patterns that we're seeing the most right now: workers who are forced to quit because of caregiving obligations, specifically school closure or caring for a sick family member. That is good cause to quit. The other is having a reasonable fear for one's health. And this is also very common right now, especially for essential workers who are working at essential businesses, especially where there isn't protective gear provided and social distancing isn't being enforced. It's understandable that a lot of workers are fearful of going to work. That would be a good cause as well. One provision that's important to note with good cause quits is that the worker is expected to take steps to preserve the employment. And some things to consider is something like working remotely, if that's possible. Workers should request for that. Taking sick days, taking leave, all of these protections that Katie talked about, all of those are things to explore prior to quitting, unless it's completely futile and you know that your employer has a history of never approving leaves, never paying out sick pay. We see a lot of workers who are in that situation. And so as long as you can show that, you know, there's been other workers who have been denied for making similar requests and you felt like it was futile to attempt it, then you'll be fine. Next slide, please. Thanks. So a little bit about the application process. Again, remembering that the agency is impacted in a way that it's never been impacted before. Online is the best way to apply, mostly because it takes the least amount of contact by the agency. And so for that reason, it's the fastest way to get through the system. Although I also understand that sometimes the website has been down. You can also apply by mail or by fax. You can find the paper application on their website or by phone. And the phone access, I know, is a terrible disaster. You know, EDD has only had phone hours for 4 hours, 5 days a week for the last few years. Starting last Monday, they increased the English phone line to 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. I still understand that workers are not getting through. Please try, keep trying. Eventually, you will be reached. You will be able to reach someone. And important that if you are one of those people who have been trying to apply, who doesn't have internet or who doesn't feel comfortable online and have been trying to apply by phone for weeks now, it's super important that you document, try to capture your call log, all the attempts that you've made to try to get through. You know, screenshots, pictures, a diary of sorts, a note log, so that when you eventually do get through, you can request that your application get backdated to the first time you tried to contact them. Okay, super important. Another consequence of the pandemic is that the 1 week waiting period that most unemployed persons have to serve before they start getting paid has been waived. That means that if you were, you know, if you lost your job last week, you would be able to be paid this week. That doesn't mean that you're actually going to receive the money this week. It usually takes 21 days to process a claim and to issue a first payment. But given the volume, we are expecting some delays. The delays have been mitigated by all of the streamlining that's happening at the front end by the agency, them just basically going through initially approving everybody and getting the payments out. So hopefully you will start seeing payments within 21 days. We have heard from workers who applied in March, early March, and who have been paid. So we'll see how that timeline evolves as things go on. Ongoing certification. So the interesting thing about ongoing certification, so generally under other times with unemployment insurance, once you get approved, you still have to certify each and every week that you are looking for work, able and available, that you haven't refused job offers, and if you've worked, that you report your income. The certification process has actually, as of last Thursday, completely halted. Again, the labor secretary is doing her best to try to get everybody through the system, and the online mechanism basically just can't absorb additional contact at this point. And so ongoing certification has completely been suspended through, I believe it's May 9th. I think it's the first full week of May. That means that nobody needs to certify in order to get paid for these weeks. That's pretty huge. The one exception to that is that if you return to work and earn wages between now and then, you actually do have to report it, and there's a mechanism by which you can do that on the Ask EDD platform. The last time I checked the website, it wasn't up yet, but it is going to be up fairly soon if it's not there as of today. And this is again only through the first full week of May. I can't say for sure if they're going to go back to certifying or not, but in case they do, some things to be mindful of. The work search, this requirement has been temporarily waived due to the pandemic. I don't know how long that will be the case, but currently there's not an expectation that unemployed workers look for work. Being able and available for work has also been a requirement that is now being interpreted less restrictively. So for those of you who have childcare obligations at home, under other circumstances that might make workers unable and unavailable to perform their usual jobs, EDD is taking a look at these situations on a case-by-case basis. And so there's a suggestion that they are going to approve people despite them also having childcare obligations at home. Another detail is that you also have to remain in good immigration status, and I'll talk about immigration status at length in a little bit, but it is important that unemployment insurance is only for documented workers, workers with work authorization, and you do have to remain in status to be able to collect unemployment insurance. You can also not refuse a new job without good cause. And this is going to be an interesting provision. We're already seeing that some workers have been offered their jobs back, but under inferior terms. And I think the case law isn't very clear on how inferior the terms have to be. Some suggest that if it's like a reduction in pay, for example, if it's a significant reduction in pay, that would be good cause. So maybe anywhere between like 30 to 50% of a reduction in pay. So something to be aware of. And then again, super important, and this is still in effect as of today, despite the lessening of all the other certification requirements. If you work and expect to receive income based on that work, you need to report it when you earned it, not necessarily when you paid it. So if you worked this week, but you don't anticipate getting paid until next week, you still have to report it this week. All right, next slide. I'm actually going to just keep going, and then I'll take a look at all the questions after. So just an overview of the new federal unemployment benefits that are made possible by the CARES Act. I've already alluded to two of these. The first is pandemic emergency unemployment compensation. This is the additional 13 weeks of benefits that is going to be tacked on to the end of state unemployment insurance weeks, so that in California, workers are now eligible for a total of 39 weeks. The next one is pandemic unemployment assistance, and this is actually a significant day in California. Today is the first day that you can actually apply for pandemic unemployment assistance. This is a new program that is intended to capture the people who are not eligible for traditional state unemployment insurance benefits. So this is the self-employed, true independent contractors, people who perhaps had worked some, but do not have sufficient base income, base period income. We're also learning that the state is now encouraging people who are serving false statement disqualification weeks from past overpayments to apply for pandemic unemployment assistance. And in some ways, pandemic unemployment assistance seems to be a fairly good match to state unemployment insurance. It is also a total of 39 weeks until the end of the year, and it can be retroactive to April 2nd of this year, even if the application is today. And that retroactivity will be automatic. Interestingly, it also includes people who are sick or caring for others with COVID-19. And so there's a little bit of a weird interaction with SDI and PFL here in California. And again, this is a consequence of having a federal law being kind of superimposed on a state, on a state that actually have some really wonderful protections for workers. And it also includes people who cannot work because of school closures. So if you were to get denied by unemployment, to say that you weren't able and available enough because of childcare needs, then you would squarely fit into pandemic unemployment assistance. And finally, pandemic unemployment compensation. This is the extra $600 a week that I alluded to earlier. This applies both to unemployment insurance and PUA, and it started to get paid out on April 13th, and it's retroactive to March 29th, which was the Sunday after the CARES Act was signed. All right. Next slide, thank you. Some tips for applying for unemployment insurance. These are actually very similar to the ones that Katie reviewed for state disability insurance and paid family leave. Above all else, be honest. Try to be honest. Do your darnest to be honest. Do not file under a Social Security number that was not given to you by the Social Security Administration. I saw earlier in the chats questions about, can I file with an ITIN? No, do not file with an ITIN. The ITIN is really just for tax purposes. Your earnings history has not been reported to EDD with an ITIN, and it'll just complicate the situation. Super important to identify your last employer, and that's literally like the last person you worked for before, in time chronology, before you became unemployed, and then all other employers in your base period. For workers who have been misclassified as independent contractors, and this is especially for all of those who work in as a gig worker or on those platforms, or also for workers who are paid in cash. These are workers for whom the EDD likely does not have any reported earnings from. Super important that you try to calculate as best you can the wages that you earned during your base period. And I've talked a little bit about this, but if you are filing this quarter, your base period is the calendar year of 2019. If for some reason you have no earnings in that base period and you only worked in the beginning of 2020, they will consider that as an alternate base period. So that could still keep you within the unemployment insurance system. And the most important thing is to characterize your separation as best as you can. There is a new reason on the application, and that is related to the coronavirus, COVID-19, and that I think will likely be the right answer for a lot of workers right now. So important to note that. All right, just a few more slides. Next, please. The life of a claim. So you file your claim. The first thing that's going to happen is that you're going to receive a notice of award. And this is where there's going to be a listing of what EDD has on you based on what employers have reported to them. And so it should include all of your employers and your base period earnings. If for some reason that notice of award doesn't include everything, it's incredibly important that you submit additional information by mail within 30 days. And on our website, we actually have a whole video on how best to do that. The telephone interview, this traditionally happens. It is currently not happening at all, not at least before people are being approved. It is possible that they will go back to implement the telephone interview. Time will tell, but it's important to realize that that should not be happening. No one should be calling you from EDD right now. But if they do, please answer. The next thing is the notice of determination. Your claim is approved, but before you actually can receive unemployment insurance, you do, and this is again, not how it currently is, but technically you would have to certify every 2 weeks. Currently and through the first full week of May, you do not have to do anything else to be paid out. If your claim is denied, and this is incredibly important because we do think that some people will be denied, or get a notice of termination later on denying them after they've been paid some benefits, it's incredibly important that you submit a written appeal by mail, and you have a 30-day window to do so. The appeals are heard by a separate agency, the California Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board, and we often guide workers through that process, and so please contact us if you're in that situation in the near future. And then the last two slides are specifically addressed to immigrant workers, because there is a lot of confusion about what benefits an immigrant worker is eligible for. Only documented immigrant workers can apply for unemployment insurance. That doesn't mean you need to be a US citizen or a legal permanent resident to apply. So long as you have work authorization during some of your base period and while you're receiving unemployment insurance, you are eligible for both unemployment insurance and PUA. Okay, so we serve asylees, refugees, U visa, T visa recipients, DACA recipients. All of these workers are eligible for unemployment insurance and should apply. Also really important to note that all of these benefits that we've talked about today, SDI, PFL, UI, they're all considered earned benefits. They will not impact the public charge rule, which is a concern for a lot of immigrant workers. And finally, for those who are undocumented, let's go through all their rights. And unfortunately, unemployment insurance is unavailable for undocumented immigrant workers, but it's literally the only protection in which that's the case. Everything else is covered, okay? So take paid sick days, take a medical leave. If you're injured or you get sick on the job, apply for workers' compensation. Apply for state disability insurance if your doctor has certified you as disabled, either because of a physical or a mental condition. Apply for paid family leave if you're providing care for a sick family member. Access California's new disaster relief fund. We are still trying to learn how it's going to be rolled out, but beginning in May, families are going to be able to receive up to $1,000 per household. And we know that it'll be administered by community-based organizations, maybe some of you, but we don't know very much more. And a colleague of ours has actually also put together here on this link, you can access an amazing spreadsheet of dozens of other relief funds that have been set up by worker organizations, by local communities to help undocumented immigrant workers through this unprecedented economic crisis. Okay, I think with that, we will turn to questions.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. There are so many good questions, a lot of great questions that you put out. So I can start by answering some of the ones you had about the FFCRA and paid sick days, and then after a little bit, I'll start asking Carol some of the questions that you sent her direction as well. So let's see. One question was for state disability insurance. Can you print off the application online and send it in? Or is there a specific barcode? Unfortunately, you can't print it off. You can either apply online or you can request that they mail an application to your home, which is another way to do it. A lot of healthcare providers also have forms available. One question was for the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, FFCRA paid sick days. If you can get 2 weeks for each qualifying event, or like to care for each child, but it's just 2 weeks total, that's it. So, you know, even if you're sick and then you need to take care of your children and then another family member is sick, for the paid sick days, it's just 2 weeks. And then the 12 weeks of leave, if a child care center is closed, that's just a one-time thing. One question was for the FFCRA, do employees need to pay that money back? They do not. Somebody asked what order someone should use their different sources of paid sick days in. It's good to use the FFCRA paid sick days first because they only last through the end of this year. And then afterwards, you can use any days that you've already accrued with your employer or your state paid sick days, because the FFCRA weeks are in addition to anything that you've already accrued with your employer. One question was, what do you do when your 12 weeks run out? It's a big question and it's a big problem. There aren't really job protections available for more than 12 weeks, except for if it's for somebody's own disability. Our hope is that some of the state laws will develop to address that during this crisis, or even federal laws as it becomes clearer that these problems are going to happen and people are going to be out for more than 12 weeks. But right now, there's not much there. Though if somebody runs out of those 12 weeks from the FFCRA and then they still aren't able to go back to work, they would be able to apply for unemployment. What happens if your employer says that you cannot return to work after taking FFCRA leave? So they're not allowed to do that. You can make a complaint with the Department of Labor. You can also call our helpline and we can talk about some strategies to try to find a way back. One person wanted me to clarify the work tenure threshold for the FFCRA. So it is 30 days for the paid leave. For the paid sick days, those 2 weeks, there is no threshold. For the 12 weeks, it's 30 days. I mentioned 90 days in reference to the California paid sick days, which is the 3 paid sick days that everybody in California can receive. And that was before the coronavirus and will continue afterwards. Another question was if the FFCRA provides job security. It does. An employer is not allowed to treat anybody worse for having taken that time off. It is available for people who are undocumented. For state disability insurance and paid family leave, you do need to have paid into the state system. So if somebody is being paid in cash, chances are their employer has not been deducting pay to pay into that state system. So if they apply, the state would say, you have not paid in and there's no money available. One question was, what about if you've furloughed yourself because of childcare? Can you return to work afterwards? If you are currently on a leave because you are taking care of a child because the school is closed, I think it would be worth talking to your employer and saying, hey, I want to clarify, I'm taking this time under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, or I saw that I can take 12 weeks and get paid during this time and return to my job. Let's talk about it. And then somebody asked, what if someone is working for an employer with over 500 employees, but they find themselves in an unsafe situation at work? So if there's over 500 employees, like we talked about, they would not qualify for the FFCRA time off. But if somebody were to quit their work because it was unsafe, like Carol talked about, there are ways that you could set yourself up to have a good chance of being able to get unemployment by showing that, you asked for that equipment, or you saw other people ask for PPE and they didn't receive it, and you tried to take steps to see if there was a way that you could work safely and your employer said no. Carol, are you ready for some questions?
I am. Sorry, I've been jotting down questions from the chat. So I have a few that I can answer already, unless you have some.
Whichever works. I wrote down some from the chat that I thought.
Well, let me start with the ones I was able to jot down while you were speaking, and then it would be great if you could fill in anything I don't get to. So a lot of questions around earning income while receiving unemployment insurance. So it's not a dollar-to-dollar offset. It is a 75% offset. And so just as a rule of thumb, for workers who are receiving the maximum weekly benefit award in California, $450, so long as you don't earn $600 in a week, you will not offset your benefits in their entirety. So it's super important to realize that it's not based on the hours that you're working necessarily, but it's based on your earnings. And again, it's not dollar for dollar, but it's a percentage of 75% of what you earn gets deducted from your weekly benefit amount. So happy to do some math with some of you if you want to send me the specifics of a situation, but that's the general provision. How long must you have worked for to qualify for unemployment insurance? There's actually no length of employment. What is required is sufficient base period earnings, and the minimum is $1,300 for the base year. It should be $1,300, over the whole year, ideally in a quarter of 3 months. But even if you only receive $900 in a quarter, as long as you received $1,300 in the year, you will be eligible for unemployment insurance. So questions about how long, like an asylee or an immigrant worker who recently received an EAD, so long as they have some base period earnings while they were in status, they will be eligible for unemployment insurance. And if they don't, then they should be eligible for PUA, pandemic unemployment insurance. A lot of questions around Uber and Lyft drivers, a lot of confusion here. And again, this is partly created because pandemic unemployment assistance, a federal program, is being kind of superimposed on California laws. In California, since January of this year, most gig workers actually are eligible for unemployment insurance under AB 5. I've actually been able to successfully get unemployment insurance for these drivers prior to 2020, as far back as 2018. And so I think a lot of these drivers should be going to unemployment insurance. They will have the issue of their companies not having reported their earnings because their companies still don't identify them as employees. And so there will be an additional barrier to the process, but they are eligible for unemployment insurance. Is it the same application for unemployment insurance and pandemic? My understanding that it's the same online platform, but it's two separate applications. I actually haven't had the chance to explore the pandemic unemployment insurance, pandemic assistance application went live today at 10 while we were talking. So I haven't had a chance to explore it yet. But I've seen some screenshots that have come in through text and it does look slightly different from unemployment insurance application. For questions around certification, if you certify online, do you also have to submit by paper? No, it's enough to just do one of them. And again, currently between now and the first full week of May, there's no requirement to certify. The only thing you have to do is report any earnings that you receive through work. And you can do that through an Ask EDD online platform. Another question, gosh, I can barely read my notes. If you are provided money, do you have to report it to EDD? No, the short answer is no. If it's not for services performed or work performed, and it's like, not intended to be like wage replacement, for example, specifically, then it doesn't have to be reported. It's not like public benefits where you have to report any new income. So like if a family member gives you money to buy groceries, that does not have to be reported. I'm trying to think, I think there was a question maybe about sick pay. I'm not remembering now.
Carol, there was a question about severance and if that's something that somebody would need to report.
Awesome, thank you. Yes, severance should be reported to EDD. It is something that they actually specifically ask about in their application. shouldn't offset any benefits. And so if someone reports severance and they start using it to offset the unemployment insurance benefits, please contact us, because they shouldn't be doing that. But it is helpful that you report these payments, especially if they're from an employer, because employers sometimes do report those as earnings to EDD, and that could trigger an overpayment and then a false statement penalty and a whole big mess that we'd love to avoid if we can. So if there are payments coming through to your employer, from your employer, important to report them, but also to characterize them as not wages for work being performed. One last question that I wrote down and I can decipher my notes on. Can you mark no to looking for work and still receive unemployment insurance? Our understanding is yes, right now. I don't know how long that will be the case, but currently the requirement that one looks for work has been suspended because of the pandemic. Any other questions, Katie, that I haven't scribbled down?
I got most of them. Two other ones that I thought people might be interested in that were asked were, one was like, what if you make an error in your initial unemployment application? Like, what should you do?
That is a great question. In a perfect world, you would call them. But at this point, given the volume of calls that they are getting, I don't know that it makes any sense to block the phone lines and to waste hours of your time doing so. I would probably recommend, where possible, to put something in writing and to mail it in, so that if ever there's a question and they come back and say, oh, well, you didn't disclose this, or you withheld information, you have a copy of the letter that you sent on April 29th saying, I made a mistake, and now you have the full information. Yeah, unfortunately, I think because of how many people are interacting with the agency right now, it's really impossible. I'm not going to say impossible, but it's very unlikely that one will get through in a reasonable time frame. And so I also want those who can't, who are having a hard time applying online, be able to apply through the phone lines. And so I, just out of courtesy to those people who are still trying to access their benefits and start an application, I would say let's leave the phone lines open to those people and make corrections in writing.
And so I will say I've heard for the disability insurance and the paid family leave lines, so you can't use them as a backdoor to unemployment. If you call and you have a question about unemployment insurance, once you reach a person, they'll say, no, I can't talk about it with you. So it's not a way to get unemployment insurance questions answered, but from what I've heard, the wait times are actually very low at the moment. I heard from somebody the other day who called in Spanish the disability line and got through to somebody within 10 minutes. So I can't make any promises, but if you're seeking information about paid family leave or state disability insurance, maybe feel a little bit more optimistic. So another question, Carol, and I'm not sure if you'll have the answer for this one, because this might fall into the category of what is still being updated by the DOL and the EDD. But so if you're getting unemployment insurance, once that runs out, can you apply for PUA?
That's a great question. Yes, we believe that's the intended goal of PUA. So there's going to be unemployment insurance for 26 weeks. There's the additional 13 weeks. There's also going to be a moment in time where California is going to trigger what's called extended benefits. We're not there yet, but I think we'll be there really soon. And so there's going to be an additional few weeks that Californians are going to receive on unemployment insurance. And then when they have completely gone everything they can out of our unemployment insurance system, then they will be eligible for PUA. And we learned actually last night when the DOL issued their guidance. I got it around 9 p.m. and studied it as much as I could last night. But there is an expectation that states basically revisit every application every quarter, so every 3 months, and determine whether that person is on the correct benefit. And so it's really putting the onus on the agency to make sure that people who are receiving unemployment insurance are receiving unemployment insurance, people who can't receive unemployment insurance receive pandemic unemployment assistance. And there is this idea that if for whatever reason you don't qualify for unemployment insurance, you can transition to PUA and then transition back to unemployment insurance. This is especially important for people who are serving disqualification penalty weeks. It seems that the DOL is approving this idea where you would collect PUA for the time that you have been disqualified, anywhere from 2 to 23 weeks, and then you would be transitioned back to unemployment insurance. So there's going to be, I think, a lot of movement between these various programs, and time will tell how it's really implemented. But we'd love to hear your stories as well and learn from your experiences.
Great. And then I thought we should take a couple of minutes just to talk a little bit more about our office and what services we provide. So I've seen some questions about what languages our staff speaks. So we have people who speak, I believe, Cantonese, Mandarin, and Spanish on staff.
And Portuguese.
And Portuguese. And then we also use a language line service. So if somebody speaks a different language, we'll still find a way to communicate with them and provide the same services. And the way it works for our helplines generally is you'll call that number and you'll leave a message, and then somebody will get back to you. So for the work and family helpline, we usually aim to get back within 2 to 3 business days. It's been a little busier lately, so I'd say it might be closer to 3 to 4 business days, but someone will call you back, ask you questions about what's happening, and then based on that conversation, they'll either provide you with advice then and there, or sometimes it's a law student who's working with the attorneys at our office, and then they need to consult with us and then shortly give you a call back and explain what your rights are and provide some advice. Carol, do you want to speak at all about the wage clinics that you do?
Sorry, I went back into the chat. Yeah, we also serve clients through, well, we're now virtual wage clinic for workers who haven't been paid their full wages. A lot of workers have been separated. They haven't been paid in full. They haven't been paid their paid sick days, which I know everybody really wants right now. So we are doing intakes with clients over the phone and then helping them prepare the initial complaint that would start their claim at the labor commissioner. So for those of you who are interested in learning more about that, you can contact us, and the information is on our website.
Great. Out of one other thing I wanted to mention, this is another one of those like recent changes, so I didn't update the slideshow in time. So there's also, the governor put out an executive order, I think last week, providing 2 weeks of paid sick days to people who are working in the food industry who work for employers with over 500 employees. So we talked about that 500 employee threshold. So for people above the 500, if they're in the food industry, they can also get 2 weeks. So
this is great. This is Beth. We're almost out of time, and I just wanted to appreciate the two of you so much for all your great information. And I'm so happy that we recorded this, and we will be sending out a link of the recording. And people are asking about answers to the questions. I'm wondering, we are able to get the chat questions, and maybe we could type them up and you would be able to respond to them and send them out. Is that something you could do for us?
Sure, yeah, we'd be happy
Absolutely.
to.
That'd be great. That'd be great. And yeah, any final words? And I want to remind people to please complete your evaluation. That's how we know. And if there's a question that you want to ask that you didn't get to ask, you can put that in there as well. But thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your time and all the families you serve, and
yes,
don't hesitate to reach out to us.
I was just going to add, things are still changing very regularly, literally, like it feels like day to day. So,
And will you be willing to come back and provide an update?
Absolutely. We'd be more than happy to.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. We really appreciate your time and your completing the evaluation. I want to thank Leah Yancey, who's our Zoom goddess, and appreciate all the work that she's been doing. And thank you, everyone, for attending. And goodbye for now. Hope to see you or hear you and see your name at the next training that we're doing. Bye-bye for now.